What role does the U.S. Constitution play in the state legislature?
It's a great question. So, the Utah State Constitution is basically mimics or almost duplicates the U.S. Constitution. Not in all things. It's the Utah Constitution is more broad and expansive than the federal Constitution. But there is this inherent separation of powers component to the federal Constitution and what is known as the Supremacy Clause. So in essence, if the Constitution is silent on the U.S. Constitution and Congress hasn't subsequently acted through statute to create precedent on the federal level, the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights says that those powers are then delegated, or not delegated, but reserved for the people. Those powers are reserved for the people and the states. So if the federal Constitution, the federal government doesn't act or create law, the states control in those areas. And it's, federalism at its highest level. I believe that to a large extent, the federal government has slowly scope creeped. It's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And Congress, quite literally, when they pass a law, they've granted rulemaking authority to the executive branch. And their rulemaking authority gives them the rights to expand their influence and power and authority without congressional oversight. You've seen it with the EPA, you've seen it with the U.S. Department of Education, you've seen it with the Department of Interior and the BLM and their land management processes. I mean, every agency in the federal government has grown beyond its original intent and scope. And unless Congress is willing to rein them in, they're going to continue to function, they're going to continue to expand. In fact, Congress last year only passed about 800 pages of new statute. The Federal Registry, which shows all the rules that were done by these agencies, was 87,000 pages in new rules. To give you an idea, that's like 8 foot tall, 2 stacks 8 foot tall versus an inch and a half thick. That's an enormous amount of regulation. It's an enormous amount of pushing upon the people the will of the few in Washington, D.C. I am a federalist, and I believe that the states are the fourth branch of government and should have and do have the authority to push back against the federal government. And in doing so, I think the fight in the last days, the fight here before us in the next 10 to 20 years is going to be here at the state level. It's going to be men and women standing up saying, enough's enough, we're not going to do that. And it's going to be hard because they're going to say, well, the Supremacy Clause, and we're telling you what you have to do. And it's a fine line. I think we see our governor do it. We see the state legislature do it. We're constantly pushing back on those federal overreaches. It's a big issue, and it's something that I think that we have to be informed, we have to be educated, and we have to be vigilant, or the federal government will continue to have this scope creep to a point where they're going to, the executive branch is going to be basically a de facto king, and the Congress is going to be so impotent that they're not going to be able to do anything whatsoever. And at that time, it's going to be the states that are going to have to stand up and say, enough's enough, we're not doing this. It's not going to be pleasant, but I think that in every single one of my bills, there's an element of federalism. We can act on our own accord and govern ourselves accordingly. We have correct principles, and we should govern ourselves. We don't need to be told what to do and how to do it from the federal government in all instances. That being said, there is absolutely a role for the federal government, but I think it should be limited in scope in every instance possible. But that's not what Congress has done for the last 80 years. They've abdicated their authority to the executive branch by granting rulemaking authority in every piece of legislation they write. And I think that's a bad way to run a government.